everyone. Welcome to another episode of Let's Be Perfectly Queer with Randy Davis. We have got an excellent show for you today with two incredibly amazing individuals in my life who I'm very happy to finally have joining me. So let me start with a quick introduction to each of these gorgeous souls. Garry Dart is the health and wellness educator at the AIDS Coalition of Nova Scotia. As a queer, gender-fluid Newfoundlander, he brings his experience in sexuality research, sex education, and access to healthcare for queer men with them. They have worked and volunteered for many 2S LGBTQ+ organizations in St. John's, Halifax, and Ottawa on community, provincial, and national levels for many years. They are also the campaign and tour manager of last October's Slay Stigma campaign tour with Trinity K. Bonet, educating Canadians about HIV and equals you. He has 2 honors degrees in psychology and ecology and conservation biology with a minor in French, and is currently completing a graduate certificate in advanced training in affirmative therapy for transgender communities. You will most likely find them sipping tea, cooking, reading a book, or meditating in nature. Garry, welcome to the show. It's been age. I think we had you on briefly for a couple of quick snippets when we were doing the Slay Stigma Tour show. So welcome and welcome back.
Thank you very much.
My other guest joining me today is the amazing Kero Saleib. Kero is a first-generation Egyptian-Canadian, non-binary, queer, HIV-positive advocate for the 2S LGBTQ+ community. He goes by any of the following pronouns: they, them, he, him, she, her, all depending on his mood. Kero is also an ordained priest with the Old Catholic Church, founder of Middle Eastern Nights, a party that provides a safe space for LGBTQ+ Middle Easterners. Kero is a butch drag queen known as Kero Patra in Denial. He's also the Men Who Have Sex with Men outreach coordinator at the AIDS Committee of Durham region, and is an expert on sexual health and substance use among men who have sex with men. Kero also recently became the co-producer, co-director, and host of an online show called The Queer Bunch, which is an awesome show. I watched your first episode, loved it. Kero has valuable lived experience with homelessness, substance use, and sexual abuse, and has taken all of these morbid blessings, as he calls them, to empower him to make the world a better place, one gay at a time. Kero, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here, Randy.
Yeah, I'm really pleased that we finally were able to let the stars align and have you on the show. And it's especially special for me to have you both on at the same time, because we often both individually speak but a lot of things. This is the first time the three of us have gotten together for a chat. And I know Kero and Garry, this is the first time you have actually met, although virtually. So I'm excited for that. I've had many awesome conversations with both of you, mostly around sexual health, because that's really the crux of the work that all of us do. And I'm excited to share some of that knowledge that you both bring to the table, especially around sexual health for MSM, men who have sex with men, during this wonderful COVID pandemic that we have going on, because I know both of you have done online virtual events around this topic through the organizations that you work with. So let me start with you, Garry. Tell us a little bit about some of what you've been doing since the onset of the pandemic to help folks learn more about their sexual health and safer sex practices during COVID-19.
Yeah. So before all of this happened, I primarily program and event-based. I love running around venues. Randy, you know, I'm like in those situations.
Yes.
And that's really what my background is in. And now I feel like a social media manager. Almost all of my work is online. So and that is not my area of expertise, I promise you. So it's been quite interesting. And I think we were actually able to reach a lot more people than we normally would have, and kind of a lot of a younger population through a lot of the new social social media work that we're doing versus, a lot of the client-based and like kind of on-site work that we were doing before. So I think we've actually been able to reach a lot more people through doing that. And we also I do a lot of work on like Grindr and Squirt and a bunch of these other apps and websites and stuff. And that has picked up tremendously. So we've been doing a lot more outreach in that way, a lot of questions about where to get tested, what's open, what people should be engaging in, there's a lot of shame kind of running around. I'm sure we'll talk about all this as well, but so it's been really interesting to see kind of that engagement increase as well.
Great. And Kero, I'm guessing you're seeing similar things, but tell us a little bit about the work you've been doing virtually during the course of the pandemic. So
pretty much what Gary's been doing, including the online outreach. It's been super, super busy. I think I'm busier now than I was working in the office even, and it's been a challenge in some ways. But one of the things that I'm making sure is the harm reduction approach when it comes to the conversation of hooking up during the pandemic. Like, do you tell people, no, don't do it? Or do you say, fine, here are some of the guidelines that you should follow if you do? Like, it's real talk, right? So that's been very interesting to navigate that, but also doing everything online has opened up a whole new accessibility for a lot of people that have been wanting to have these conversations and connection and allowing people to really connect with themselves. So a lot of the work has been about also focusing on how to connect with yourself, getting to know who you are as an individual. And beyond that, I started using my priesthood background and using it to do a lot of talks about faith and sexuality, doing it through online workshops. And that's also been incredibly eye-opening to see the differences between the different religious approaches and hooking up and their views on COVID, because within religion, they think COVID is a penalty from God or some kind of punishment. And you're like, no, don't think that way, kind of thing. So yeah, that's how things have been, a lot of online for sure. And I did start meeting with people face to face with a face mask in the park, because I've been struggling with it myself too. Like, to just do everything online, it's a lot.
Yeah, and it's one thing for us to talk about sexual health and safer sexual health practices during the kind of time of COVID. I know initially when COVID struck, the big messaging that we were hearing was, don't do it. Don't hook up. Don't have sex unless you're in a relationship or already have an established sexual partner in the same home that you're sort of locked up in.
Yeah.
And I think we very quickly came to realize that just isn't the way it works, especially for queer guys. It's just we saw that abstinence is not an option for most of us, and there are some who are involved in sex work that this is a livelihood as well. So to just have a blanket statement that your sex life is also in quarantine right now just isn't acceptable and doesn't work. So I think it was very important that we quickly got to the heart of that and address those issues and come up with some unique messaging around what safer sex looks like during the pandemic.
Yeah,
and I think that goes hand in hand with mental health, because that's been a huge issue happening during the pandemic as well, when we're isolated, and anxiety and depression and loneliness and all these things that you can actually address by having a physical connection with someone. And to not be able to have that connection really puts a strain on mental health. Now, I know what's going on in Ontario. Nova Scotia, Garry, tell me what's going on there with respect to sexual health and testing and treatment and those sort of things, because the majority of our health units here in Ontario have redeployed resources and shut down sexual health clinics here, which don't even get me started on that, because that's my next major hurdle to try and overcome, because I really do feel sexual health is an essential service. But yeah, I'm not sure what's going on with that respect in Nova Scotia. Can you fill us on what's happening in your area?
Yeah, it's funny that you bring this up as well, because just today there was an article came out about our Halifax Sexual Health Center. They're essentially overrun because our here in Halifax, anyways. There's really only two places to kind of go get that sexual health knowledge and testing and all that sort of stuff. It's the Halifax Sexual Health Center, and then there's a government clinic at the hospital. But that's been closed ever since COVID started, like you said. And they're only just starting to open, and now it's by appointment, and it's a lot more complicated. So there's even now more barriers once things are opening up to a lot of folks that wouldn't necessarily, might not have access to internet or phone or be able to connect in that way. And, a lot of the testing equipment, they're not doing swabbing, they're not doing other certain types of tests, and they're just basing it on presumptive cases and things like that too. So it's very, I think, there's a lot less testing, a lot less resources, there's less money into it. And then the non-government resources are completely overrun, and even they're having a lot of their resources taken. So it's been really difficult to connect people to testing and especially PrEP. I mean, they would not prescribe PrEP to new people because they were doing trials for certain medications for COVID. So if you weren't on PrEP before, you couldn't get on it, even if you were engaging in kind of higher risk activities. So from a harm reduction point of view, as both of you talk about, it kind of went the opposite way of what we should be doing. And I want to mention that, in terms of rural areas, because a lot of Nova Scotia is rural, there's nothing. There's almost no sexual health centers. There's very few places to get tested or get resources. PrEP is not covered by the government here. And a lot of people don't know what it is, where to get it. And almost absolutely nobody knows about PEP. So yeah, there's a lot of things to work on here. So I'm
Sure.
slowly trying to help out for what we can do.
Yeah, and to a certain extent, that's similar to what's happening here in Ontario. PrEP, for those listening in and watching that aren't aware, is pre-exposure prophylaxis. PEP is post-exposure prophylaxis. So it's a drug that you can take to help prevent the transmission of HIV if you are already HIV negative. So, just so folks that are watching us, Garry, may not know what those acronyms refer to. Now, Kero, sort of same question. What are you seeing in the Durham region around that? Because I know here in Simcoe, Muskoka, I approached our health unit early on in the pandemic, probably 2 weeks after the Gilbert Center shut down, and said, what are you doing around sexual health testing? And they said, well, we're not. Everything's been deployed to COVID. So we are essentially telling folks to up their condom use and only have sex with folks they know. And I'm like, okay, that's not really going to work very well. So fortunately, my good buddy Andrew Shamby, who has the PrEP clinic in Toronto, has been a great resource for folks in this area to be able to get sexual health testing done online. And he'll send the equipment to folks to do their own swabbing and then send it back in and set up testing if necessary and lab work and that sort of thing. But it's a huge barrier for a lot of folks who, for whatever reason, might not have internet access to do that, or if they can get an appointment to go into the clinic, they've got to take a drive to Toronto to get in. And I'm very concerned about those folks who, just prior to the lockdown, that were having their regular sexual activity that may have become infected. And now, 4, 5, 6 months later, we've got individuals who may be sitting with an infection that's been going untreated, because a lot of these infections don't necessarily have symptoms as well. So it's a huge concern, and I think it's a huge disservice to our community to not have this as remaining an essential service during the pandemic. And I'm curious to know whether you're experiencing anything similar in Durham.
Yeah, it's been very similar. I mean, in Durham, it's also one of the big battles that we're challenged with is the needle exchange program. So the needle exchange program, along with testing, they go hand in hand very often. So everything was shut down. Everything was redirected to focus on COVID-19, and so it became a big conversation with the city and other organizations to see what we could do. Luckily, Lakeridge Health here, the Positive Care Clinic, they were great at ensuring that they'll keep their testing open, but the hours were extremely limited as to when they could go in and get it done. But also people were terrified of going anywhere. So people did not want to go get tested anywhere. People, individuals, were just there was that fear among a lot of people. So what we did is the organizations got together, and the city, the mayor of Oshawa, and we started a project called the Mission Hub. And the Mission Hub is a one-stop shop that became the organization sat there. They all had different rooms, and they had very strict procedures in place in terms of getting your needles, your paraphernalia that you need for substance use, including testing that was available both for COVID-19 and for other STIs. So it was all available in one place, and we also focused it on, we decided to focus it more on homeless individuals and sex workers, because they were the biggest, they were the group that was challenged the most, and less accessibility at that point, because everything that, all the services became unavailable. I think, and that program was supposed to end at the end of July, but now it's been extended until end of September. It's been going well. It's been going well for sure. But again, it's to get people to want to get tested has always been a challenge in Durham. So whether COVID is happening or not, the challenge of that has always been there, and it just became worse.
Sure.
After
Yeah,
COVID.
absolutely. And I think it's important that you point out that, it's become even worse for those within the community. I mean, let's face it, the queer community is a marginalized community as it is, but then to be further marginalized as a sex worker or someone who's experiencing homelessness, that just puts that burden even greater on those individuals. So,
and the thing here in Durham as well, when it comes to the queer community, we always have to remember that we don't restrict it to just queer anymore, and that's because within the Durham region, a lot of them are in the closet with kids and children, and there's still men who have sex with men, blue collar workers, and we needed to make sure that we remove the word queer and be like everyone, and that's what we've done. And it's a lot for good conversations, though. It has a lot for good conversations when I've had the opportunity to meet with some of the individuals. So yeah,
absolutely. And I think with the forthcoming onset of home testing, specifically HIV home testing, and kits becoming available for folks to do those point of care tests on their own on HIV, and then hopefully down the road we'll have even further home testing for other STIs as well. I think that's going to go a long way into to helping sort of shed a spotlight on what's going on in all of our regions. And I can't believe my producer is sending me a text with how much little time we have left, and it seems like we just started this conversation, but I'm going to go on anyway. So Garry, tell me a little bit about what you are seeing and the advice that you're giving to folks who are still wanting to have as normal a sex life as possible during COVID-19. Because we've seen a lot of articles about glory holes have become the new safer sex for guys who have sex with men, and I think that's great. I mean, I love the fact that we are having conversations in 2020 about glory holes. I mean, this is cool in my mind. And you both know me very well, and you know that sex. Yeah, exactly. Forget the heart. We want it's yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, sex is supposed to be fun, right? And certainly it's helped me during the pandemic. I'm fortunate enough to have a husband at home, so the whole stress and anxiety and loneliness and depression that a lot of folks are feeling. I'm fortunate and privileged enough not to be feeling that, but there are a ton of folks that I speak with that are struggling. And what sort of advice are you giving those individuals, Garry?
I mean, I haven't suggested glory holes yet, but maybe I'll start doing that. I think a lot of it stems down to mental health. A lot of it is not, it's not actually the sexual health or physical health side of things. I think, like you said, loneliness is and depression, anxiety over COVID, and about meeting up with people, particularly people you don't know, and like not knowing where they've been or what they've been doing. You're less worried about STIs, I would think, and more worried about COVID. Yeah. And I'm very lucky that I live in the Atlantic bubble, so we get to travel around, and there's a lot less restrictions than in Quebec, Ontario, and places west of here. But even still, there's still a lot of people that are have a lot of these mental health problems right now. So a lot of it is surrounding that, and connecting people to counselors, and even just having a chat about what their fears are and kind of what's happening. And I know myself, it's been really lonely. I moved to this city just a couple months before COVID, and then here we are. And, we had to isolate for so long. I've built a dining room table. I've done lots of projects, but haven't really been having much sex or like those sides of things because of the anxiety and because of that isolation. So, yeah, I think addressing the mental health side of things is probably, for me, the first thing that I do and the primary thing that I talk to folks about. And then secondly is connecting people to resources, connecting people to the Halifax Sexual Health Center and testing, and making sure that they're, showering if they can before and after, and doing all of those things to avoid COVID when possible. And also not shaming people, whether they're having sex or not having sex, or if they're not in the mood. Even if you live there, you still might feel a lot of anxiety over COVID and everything that's happening in the world. So you're not going to want to have sex as often. So that's really common as well. So yeah, that's probably the advice I would give. Mental health, don't shame, and kind of connection to resources.
Absolutely. And Kero, same question to you, my friend.
For me on my side, there are two aspects that I was looking at, is for particularly individuals who are into party and play. And the second is individuals who are that need of connection, of not feeling lonely. So the party and play scene has been very interesting to navigate, but it's all about the mental health aspect of how to reconnect with your own body, how to reconnect with your own self, because a lot of individuals who PNP, it's because they feel uninhibited, they feel they could do things, but as soon as you're off the substance, that's where the challenges of how to have sex with yourself. So I've been doing a lot of education of how to have sex with yourself, how to enjoy yourself, how to reinvigorate your nipples, how to, do things that you're interested in doing with someone else, how to really regenerate the neurons in your brain to have that full enjoyment. And then the loneliness aspect, the group was mostly about loneliness. It's obviously, the advice was always about choose one person during the pandemic that you could trust, you could have the conversation with, that you could continuously hook up with during the pandemic, and have the conversation. Including your dealer. If you're PNPing, have a conversation with your dealer. Super important. What is your dealer putting in place to make sure that you're staying safe as well from COVID? So that gives them the opportunity of feeling like they're making the responsible decision of how they're going to hook up. And that helps with the mental health aspect as well in so many ways. So it's about knowing where you get your substances from, what's in place, that one person that you're going to hook up with through the pandemic, make them your go-to person. You never know, it might turn into a relationship for some of them, and it actually has for some people. So the glory hole, I recommended it as well. In the beginning, I did not, because we weren't sure, but it's funny, I just had the conversation today with someone online. He's like, there's at the campgrounds, there's a glory hole. I'm like, go have fun, enjoy that hole, right? So it's very interesting, because I compare it to the times of sex before online apps, right? So, but now we have these online apps. So another thing that I do is how to enjoy toys with yourself, enjoying toys with your partner. That's one of the things that a lot of couples like, oh, I'm not using toy. And then you go back to the mental health aspect, why you don't want to use a toy with your partner. And then they realize, hey, this could enhance a lot of things. So, so yeah, that's the direction I went in with the conversations about hooking up and having sex during COVID-19.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a lot of great points. Certainly the substance use issue, because I think we've seen during the pandemic, even outside of the sexual aspects of substance use, an increase in use of recreational drugs and alcohol consumption.
We're that's seeing more overdoses.
Yes,
overdoses are on the rise. It's awful. Durham region is having a really serious issue with it. And it's like, how do you navigate that? That's a whole different conversation.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's another 2 or 3 shows.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the Durham region, sadly, is not alone in those statistics of the opioid crisis still continuing and becoming worse as a result of COVID-19. And again, it's an issue where, services and resources have been deployed so much to COVID that we're letting these other issues slip to the wayside, and that I think is very dangerous. And I think we need to have from all levels of government a stronger COVID response, especially towards the queer community, and making sure that this doesn't happen. So I've got 2 minutes left to talk to 2 of my favorite people on the planet, and I'm very sad that there's only 2 minutes. So Garry, back to you. Just going to give you. Let's give you 45 seconds to sum up, if you could, the message that you really want to get across to folks about sex during the pandemic for tonight's show.
I would say start connecting to people, talk to people online, hit people up on Instagram, Grindr, like whatever app you want to use. Talk to people. I think communication is so important, and be honest if you're having anxiety or having fear, or you really want to hook up, and kind of what you've been doing. Communication and honesty are what make everything work. And that's what will reduce your risk of COVID, and also to have the most enjoyable sex. I mean, if you can talk about what you want and you know what you want and you tell your partner that, there you go. Sounds great to me. So,
consent and that kind of honesty is very sexy. And I also recommend Zoom calls from your tub. They're a lot of fun as well.
Yeah.
Kero, what about you? Give me less than a minute we've got here to wrap things up.
So learn how to flirt again. This is the opportunity to learn how to flirt again through communication. Learn how to flirt again, learn about toys, learn where your P-spot is, allow yourself to learn how to have an orgasm the way you want to have an orgasm. This is the best opportunity to do it. It could be a very spiritual experience, and you could do that with that one person that you want to hook up with. Just to remember that, everything that you do will affect others, so be responsible when doing it. That's all it is. We're not saying no, just be responsible.
Absolutely. Kero, Garry, I cannot thank you both enough for being on the show this evening. I love you both dearly. We will connect again offline very soon, and hopefully have you both back on the show again very soon as well. So thank all of you for watching another episode of Let's Be Perfectly Queer. Tune in again next week, and see us then. Good night, everyone.